Hi students, once again we have to meet to continue the lesson, that is evolution, that is for pure science students. Now, what is speciation? That's the next aspect. So the process by which one species evolves into two or more than two species is called what is known as speciation. So the process by which one species evolves into one or more different species is called speciation. A simple definition was given by given by an evolutionist, that is AEMS. He defines species as a genetically distinctive, that is having their own genotype, then reproductively isolate. Reproductively isolated means there is no interbreeding between the two species. There is no reproduction between two species. That is called reproductive isolation. And a natural population, it is not created by man, it is not man-made, it is a natural population. So you have to know the meaning of reproductive isolation. That means there is no reproduction possible between two different species. That means there is a loss of interbreeding between two different species. Now, the process of speciation is a fundamental process in evolution. Fundamental process in evolution. Now, what are the types of speciation, generally speaking? That is, we have general category also. This is somewhat a general one. Agenesis or phyletic speciation. So, evolution of new species from a single lineage. That means from a single species. Single lineage, just one lineage having a similar genotype. Single lineage means we are referring to a species with a specific genotype. So evolution of new species from a single lineage is called agenesis or phyletic speciation. Agenesis are also called anagenesis. Agenesis or anagenesis or phyletic speciation. Evolution of what is called a new species from a single lineage. Lineage means individuals having just a specific genotype on their own. Now here I represent the form equation. Species 1 evolves into species 2. This is called agenesis or phyletic evolution. Now the next one, cladogenesis or divergent speciation. Cladogenesis or divergent, what is called not evolution, we have speciation only. Writing evolution here, that is speciation. Divergent speciation. Cladogenesis or divergent speciation. So if one species diverges to become into two or more species, then the phenomenon is called cladogenesis or divergent speciation. Here one species to another species. The first case. Here one species diverges to become two or more species. From a single species, two or more species have evolved. That phenomenon is called cladogenesis or divergent speciation. Now we see that one species 1 is giving rise to species 2 and species 3. I am representing only two species. From a single species, two or more species have diversified. Hence called divergent speciation or cladogenesis. These are two general types of what is called speciation, from one species to another species or from one species into two or more species. Accordingly, we have agenesis or phyletic speciation, then cladogenesis or divergent speciation. There are two types of speciation based on the formation. Number one, symbiotic speciation, that resulted only because of reproductive isolation. Another one, allopathic speciation, that resulted mainly by geographical isolation. When two different species, or actually when two different animals are separated by means of geographical barriers, then what is happening? There is no reproduction. So that resulted in the formation of allopathic species. Here in symbiotic speciation, two species are present in the same, that is what is called, that is habitat. Say an example of Rana hexadactyl, Rana pipiens. These are the two different species of frog. They present the same habitat, but they do not interbreed. They maintain their species entities. What is called actually species, what is called respective species identities. Okay, now, so symbiotic speciation resulted because of only geographical isolation and not by, only by reproductive isolation and not by geographical isolation. So symbiotic speciation resulted because of reproductive isolation, not by geographical isolation. Now, allopathic speciation for Sri Lanka and India separated by Gulf of Mannar, there is a barrier, what's called geographical barrier, either in the form of mountains or in the form of rivers, etc. Here I am taking, there is what's called Gulf of Mannar, the sea that is present between Sri Lanka and India, separated with the two, just actually land masses. That is called as a geographical barrier. As we have geographical barrier, now we have reproductive isolation. So, allopathic speciation resulted because of geographical isolation followed by reproductive isolation. As the two species are separated from geographical barriers, then also we have reproductive isolation. So, both by geographical isolation, reproductive isolation. But here we have only geographical isolation given the word. Here there is no geographical isolation, only reproductive isolation. So, formation of symbiotic species resulted only by reproductive isolation, whereas the formation of allopathic species resulted because of both geographical and reproductive isolation. What is symbiotic speciation? Now it is a mode of speciation, it is a method of speciation that resulted because of what we call reproductive isolation but not geographical isolation. The two species occupy the same niche or same habitat but do not interbreed. That type of species is called symbiotic species. Species of two different types living together but do not interbreed, living together in a habitat. Say an example of the frogs, Rana hexadactyla, Rana pipiens. These are the two frogs living together in the same pond, same habitat, but they do not interbreed. And that is called that is symbiotic species living together in the same habitat but do not interbreed. Now, here is the definition. It's a mode of speciation through which new species form from a single ancestral species. One species evolves from a single ancestral species. After the formation of both the species continue to inhabit same geographical region, present in the same. That is called symbiotic, living together in the same habitat. That's the meaning for that. So species continue to inhabit same geographical region after its formation. So one species evolves into another species, but both the species after that formation living together in the same habitat but do not interbreed. That is called what is known as symbiotic species, and the phenomenon is called symbiotic speciation. Now in this case, if you are analyzing the characters, two or more species are involved in symbiotic speciation. So the new species formed due to genetic modification in the ancestral species. How is it formed? New species actually formed due to genetic modification in the ancestral species. So, and that species is naturally selected. The species that is formed newly is naturally selected by natural selection. Once formed, this new species can no longer interbreed with the parental population. Okay, so two or more species are involved. New species formed how? Due to genetic modification in the ancestral species. Once a new species formed, the one which is naturally selected, the new species should be selected by nature by natural selection. So the new species is naturally selected. Once selected, it can no longer interbreed with the parental population. There is no interbreeding between the newly formed species and what we have the parental population. Now, sexual isolation is strongest. Here it is given sexual isolation is strongest. Whereas the next one, sexual isolation is weakest. What's the meaning for that one, sexual isolation? That means there is a reproductive isolation. The meaning for that one, interbreeding is not possible between the two species. That is called sexual isolation is strongest. No interbreeding. The two individuals are reproductively isolated. Okay, reproductively isolated means no reproduction. That is called sexual isolation is strongest. Now we have one phenomenon what is called phenotypic plasticity. The phenotypic plasticity has emerged as what we have emerged as potentially important first step. What is phenotypic plasticity? I'll tell you. So phenotypic plasticity has emerged as potentially important first step in speciation. So the important first step in speciation is nothing but what we have phenotypic plasticity. And that is initiated within an isolated population. This phenotypic plasticity is normally initiated in isolated population. What is phenotypic plasticity? That is the most important first step in speciation. So phenotypic plasticity is a process in which one genotype produces more than one phenotype. One genotype produces more than one phenotype. When the phenotypic plasticity normally that is expressed, that is during what is called actually the life cycle in certain planktons, and that is called cyclomorphosis. So the phenotypic plasticity is expressed in what is called the life cycle of certain planktons. There it is called cyclomorphosis. What's the meaning for that one? A species which is present in a particular actually habitat is undergoing what is called changes seasonally. So when the phenotypic plasticity is expressed seasonally in planktons, the minute floating organisms. Say an example of Daphnia, one plankton by name Daphnia. This is an example for plasticity. This plankton, a crustacean, shows cyclic changes during different seasons, and that is called cyclomorphosis, change in the external appearance of an individual. So when plasticity is expressed seasonally in planktons, the phenomenon is called cyclomorphosis, cyclic changes during different seasons. That is called phenotypic plasticity. That is a production of more than one phenotype by a single genotype. So it undergone modifications producing more phenotypes. That is called phenotypic plasticity. When expressed seasonally in the case of planktons, that the phenomenon is called actually cyclomorphosis. And one example, Daphnia, a crustacean. Now, so I mentioned already the phenotypic plasticity is emerged as the most important first step in speciation that is initiated within an isolated population. What is phenotypic plasticity? I mentioned already, when one genotype produces more than one phenotype, then it's called just what is called the phenotypic plasticity. When the plasticity is expressed seasonally in the case of planktons, one animal what I mentioned, in the case of Daphnia, that is what we have the example planktons by name Daphnia. This is a plankton, an example for Daphnia. So expressed seasonally in planktons, one such plankton is Daphnia. It shows actually changes during their cyclic processes in what we have the different seasons, and hence called cyclomorphosis, production of more than one phenotype seasonally. Okay, now the second type of speciation, allopathic speciation, geographical isolation. The speciation that resulted mainly because of geographical isolation, followed by reproductive isolation. Both are operative to produce a different species. For example, we have the crow of three different regions. India, then Bangladesh and Pakistan, one type of crow. In Myanmar, another type of crow. In Myanmar, another type of crow. In Sri Lanka, there is another type of crow. So these crows were once upon a time were together as one species when the land mass was not separate. Because of the separation of the land masses acted as barriers which prevented them from interbreeding that resulted in the formation of new species. So allopathic speciation resulted because of geographical isolation followed by what we have actually, that is reproductive isolation. So what is the definition as per the book? So cyclomorphosis, I mentioned the example is Daphnia. Cyclic changes in the phenotype during different seasons. Simply we can see. Now, What is allopathic speciation? I want to go through as per the book. It is a mode of speciation that occurs when biological population of similar species have become isolated from each other. Biological populations of similar species become isolated from each other. That prevents gene flow. Gene flow or gene migration occurs only when there is an interbreeding. Here the gene flow refers to what is called interbreeding. There is no interbreeding is possible. There is no gene flow. This is because of allopathic speciation. A mode of speciation that occurs when biological population of similar species become isolated from each other so that they are being prevented from interbreeding. That's called here that prevent gene flow. So one species becomes two or more species due to geographical barriers. The geographical barriers may be because of the mountains or we have any other land separation or even in the form of migration. So these are all the different what is called geographical barriers, the valleys, the seas, etc. So they act as barriers and preventing the different species to breed or to interbreed. That resulted in what we call different species. So one species becomes two species or more than two species due to geographical barriers. Due to geographical barriers. So that is what is called in the form of landmass or water bodies, etc. Hence new species is evolved. And that is example Darwin's finches. We have 23 different species of Darwin's finches, nothing but the sparrow. Because of what we have, the separation of the land masses in Galapagos Islands, different just land masses in Galapagos Islands separated these species so they may not interbreed. This is because of the geographical barriers. Once we have the geographical barriers, that also resulted in reproductive isolation or reproductive barriers, and that prevent interbreeding, and that resulted in the formation of new species. Now let's continue the allopathic speciation. So the different geographical barriers are in the form of land separation, migration, or mountain formation. So when barriers occur between two species, what will happen? Change in ecological conditions or environment occur that is in that area that lead to adaptation in the case of these two different species and that produce differences. So the development of adaptations in the resultant species and also the ancestral species produce differences. If there is no adaptations, the organisms will not survive. That's why they have to adapt themselves to the changed environmental conditions. Okay, so then only we can have the two different species because of geographical barriers. Now here the sexual isolation is weakest. The meaning for that one, the reproductive isolation is not a major operative, just actually phenomenon. Mainly the geographical isolation is responsible for the formation of two species. And after that only we have the reproductive isolation. There is no interbreeding. So sexual isolation is weakest, the meaning for that one. The interbreeding is not possible. The interbreeding is not actually playing a major role. That means the reproductive isolation is not playing a major role. Only the geographical isolation plays a major role in the formation of allopathic species. Now the example we have studied here, adaptation of one apple maggot flies that feed on apple in North America. So we have one species that lay eggs in the fruit of hawthorns. Then after the formation of a subset of populations, now the subset of populations normally just lay eggs in what we have the apple fruit. Let's see now. What is the name of the apple maggots and what is the name of the apple tree, the binomial, and how it happens, the example. So adaptation of apple maggots that feed on apples in North America is an example for allopathic speciation. Now the best example for allopathic speciation, the apple maggot flies that feed on apple in North America. So when the apple trees were imported to North America, the apple maggot flies, the binomial Ragoletis, Homenella, home. That's a kind of, you see that one, There is a type of fruit, that is the apple belongs to that classification form. So that's why the name is given. Apple maggot flies, Rago, Latis, Pomenella. So this is a parasitic insect. What is called actually this apple maggot flies, a parasitic insect that normally laid eggs. Where it laid eggs in the fruits of wild, what we have, hawthorns, a kind of plant. Okay, until how long? Until one sublet population began to lay its eggs, what we have in the fruit of domesticated apple trees. So, to begin with, we have one apple maggot flies that normally lay its eggs in wild hawthorns until one sublet population, that is a new population, sublet population, we can say subset of population, that is nothing but a subpopulation of this group, began to lay eggs in the fruit of domesticated apple. The name of the apple tree, Malus domestica, that grew in the same area. So initially, the parasitic insect laid eggs in wild hawthorns. How long? Just until one sublet of population began to lay its eggs, that is in the fruit of domesticated apple trees that grew in the same area. So this small group of apple maggot flies originally lay their eggs what we have in the wild hawthorns, selected from the rest of the population. The rest of the population, there is the one which laid eggs in what we call wild hawthorns, and its offspring became accustomed to domesticated apples. So now they feed on. So now they laid eggs only in the case of domesticated apple fruit and not in the case of what's called wild hawthorns. Now we have two different species. One species is adapted to wild hawthorns, that is to lay eggs. Another species is adapted to what's called the apple tree's fruit to lay eggs. So they have become distinct in what we have laying the eggs. So that's why we have two different species have evolved. So as a result, now the small group of population and also their offspring became accustomed to what's called domesticated apples instead of what's called wild hawthorns. This is because of the evolution of two different species. One species, the same species, but evolved into another species, a kind of what's called allopathic speciation, present in the same area, but we have. So we can also call this one as a symbiotic species because living in the same area, there is no reproductive isolation. Same example is given in the book. What's the best example for just actually allopathic speciation? So with this I conclude about the types of speciation. We have to go for extinction, the next topic. Now extinction of animals. That is complete disappearance of an organism from the population or complete disappearance of a particular species is called extinction. Now extinction was common if not inevitable. That is evitable. If it is evitable, not inevitable means if it is evitable. Because species could not always adapt to the larger or rapid changes in the environment. So the adaptation is not possible for all the organisms at all the time. So that they cannot adapt themselves to the changed environmental conditions. As a result, those species which are not being selected by nature, those individuals which are not adapted to the changed environmental conditions, rapid changes in the environment, larger changes in the environment, became extinct. Now, so the impact of extinction, the effect of extinction can conveniently be considered at three different levels. Okay, the impact of extinction on the population can conveniently be studied at three different levels. Number one, species extinction. Number two, mass extinction. Number three, global extinction. What is species extinction? Elimination of entire species. What is the reason for that one? So elimination of entire species by an environmental event. Maybe just what we have, the flood or any the tsunami, various climatic conditions or biological event. So biological even includes the diseases, non-availability of food resources, whether 50% or just more than 50%, half or more than half. That results in what's called species extinction. So due to environmental event or due to biological event, we have extinction of entire species occurs. Now the next one, mass extinction, eliminates a half or more species, eliminates half or more species in a region or ecosystem, as normally might occur following volcanic eruption. So because of volcanic eruption in a particular area, we have the entire species occupied that habitat might disappear, and that is called mass extinction. Large number of individuals are eliminated. So eliminates half or more species in a region or ecosystem after what we call the volcanic eruption. Now we can see normally the mass extinction can be normally just so we can see the mass extinction that occurred just actually 5 different times since from the Cambrian period of Paleozoic era. So in the past we had 5 mass extinctions since from the Cambrian period. The Cambrian period is nothing but one of the periods of what is called Paleozoic era. So we have what is called Ordovician period, Permian period, Devonian period. Now we have the Cretaceous period of Mesozoic era and a Triassic period of Mesozoic era. So mass extinction occurred 5 times in 3 eras, two eras. One is Paleozoic era, another one Mesozoic era. In Paleozoic era, during the Ordovician period, we have what's called the Permian period, and also what we have just um, the disappearance during the Cretaceous period, and then what we have actually Triassic period of the Mesozoic era. So these are all what we have, the Devonian period, Permian period, what we have the just what is called the Ordovician period. These are all the 3 periods of Paleozoic era known for mass extinction. And Permian period was actually the period during which the maximum mass extinction occurred, Permian period of Paleozoic era. We also had extinction of the dinosaurs during what is called the Triassic and also Cretaceous period of Mesozoic era. Mass extinction of reptiles and birds occurred during what we have the periods of Mesozoic era. Let's do one by one. I mentioned already we have 5 major mass extinction that occurred since Cambrian period, one of the periods of Paleozoic era. There are 7 periods in Paleozoic era. This is the earliest one. This mass extinction also referred as KT mass extinction. K and T just normally extinction refers to the German word, that is Cretaceous, one of the periods of Mesozoic era, and Tertiary period. Now here the extinction period date in million years ago. Estimated percentage of marine animal extinction. 2/3 of the marine animals became extinct. So we have end of the Ordovician period of Paleozoic era. So the first 3, Ordovician, Devonian, and Permian period, they are coming into Paleozoic era. The Triassic period is coming under what we have seen. So we have the major extinction normally occurred during what is called the Permian period. Major marine invertebrates become extinct. Nearly 84 genera and the 96 species became extinct. So remember that one. Major extinction occurred during the Permian period of Paleozoic era. 84 genera and then what's called 96 species of marine invertebrates became extinct. So this is one answer. Major mass extinction occurred during Permian period. So end of Ordovician, that is nearly 440 million years ago, 61 genera and 85 species became extinct. The end of Devonian, the Devonian period is known for age of fishes, and there you have just 365 million years ago. Then loss of 55 and 82, 55 genera and 82 species. I mentioned already the Permian period is known for major mass extinction. Just 245 million years ago, 84 genera and 96 species became extinct. Mass extinction, major mass extinction only during the Permian period. Now, the Triassic period of what is called the Triassic period of what we have, that's a Mesozoic era, we have actually 208 million years ago, that is 50 genera and 76 species became extinct. And the end of Cretaceous, we have just 65 million years ago, 50 genera and 76 species became extinct. So remember, major mass extinction occurred during the Permian period or at the end of Permian period. Now, the last type of extinction that can be normally explained, global extinction. This extinction normally eliminates most of the species on a large scale and a larger taxonomic groups, that is either in the continent or from the total earth. So, elimination of most of the species on a large scale or large taxonomic groups, elimination of large taxonomic groups, entire phylum or entire what we have, just a genus, etc., in the continent or just totally on the earth. That is called what is known as global extinction. Now, what is the importance or significance of extinction? Now, extinction events open up new habitats for the organisms and so can facilitate the radiation of organisms from an ancestor. From one species we have the formation of many species, that is called the radiation of organism. Those organisms that escape from mass extinction, that's why here given that survived the mass extinction. So they escape from the mass extinction. So we have two just actually significance. One, new habitats are actually developed because of what is called the extinction events. And secondly, the radiation of organisms. Those organisms survive mass extinction. Those organisms escape from the mass extinction. They undergo radiations to form different species. That's about what we have the extinction. So, with this extinction, that's the last part of evolution for pure science students. I completed the entire evolution lesson, both for bio as well as what we have the pure science students. Now we have to go for another lesson, some events related to the principle of inheritance for pure science students. 2 or 3 pages only. That's the last part for you. So anyway, thank you. I'll conclude with this one.